Well, can I welcome everybody?
Yeah, they're starting to join now.
Oh, shall I wait for them to do a bit more joining?
Yeah, this should be coming in now. So we've got 33, they're all coming in now.
So I think 3, 2, 1, we'll go.
Okay, welcome to everybody who's already joined us, and welcome to those of you who are busy joining. I'm Richard Best. I'm Vice Chair of the APPG on Healthy Homes and Buildings, the all-party parliamentary group. My credentials are I'm an independent in the House of Lords. I'm president of the Sustainable Energy Association, who are one of the backers of this APPG. And I'm currently chairing the Oxford University Commission on Creating Healthy Cities. So lots of interest from me in what we're going to hear today under this big theme of delivering decent homes for the future. If I could begin just by saying thank you to our sponsors, without whom we can't have these meetings. Thank you to BEMA, Saint-Gobain, DLUHC, Healthy Property Group, E.ON, and McCarthy and Stones. Thanks to all of those. And we couldn't have a more topical issue to debate. If you think of the big ticket, big issues facing the country, indeed facing the world, you find that decent homes features quite prominently on any of those agendas. If it's climate change, net zero, CO2 emissions, big topical issue, very much about homes as much as about any other kind of part of the built environment. Healthy issues, the funding of the NHS, the costs of healthcare in an aging society, comes back to decent homes. An awful lot of that, the bed blocking that we're worrying about with ambulances waiting outside hospitals. People cannot be discharged from hospital if their homes won't receive them. And they'll be in hospital in the first place if the home has rejected them. There have been accidents in the home. There's been that awful problem of cold and damp that send people into hospital with all kinds of conditions, as well as accidents. It's the home that's at the back of an awful lot of the NHS's problems, funding problems, and of course, social care, very topical issue of the day. How are we going to pay for social care? How do we keep people out of residential care, which is so expensive? And government plans for easing the costs of paying for social care they haven't caught the public's imagination, even though we're all going to pay, all of us who are working are going to pay an increased levy for those costs. Social care costs can be mitigated by better housing, as we well know. All of these big ticket agenda items come back to creating the healthy homes of tomorrow, of the future. So I think we're going to really dig in. We've got speakers from government departments, from industry, and academic experts. Hopefully, really together, we're going to get our heads around where we're going with this big issue of achieving the decent homes of tomorrow, and in particular, the content for the decent home standard that is going to dictate those conditions for the future. So let's start away. Let's have a quick look at the agenda. Here it is. We're going to start with Simon Dennison, who's from the DLUHC department, and quickly followed by Sam Balch from BEIS, the government spokespeople. They're going to tell us what government is up to. Then we get to the industry panel after a bit of discussion and Q&A, and then we got a panel from that industry group, Ceri Roberts, Richard Turkington, and Gareth Eadsforth. We'll come to each of those in turn. So let's just see the questions that we hope we can pose some answers to. Are the government standards and housing policies moving in the right direction? Never mind net zero targets, what about the health of the people just living in those homes? Can the decent home standard really do the trick and modernize the agenda for being consistent with the government's strategic plan, the heat and buildings strategic plan that we've now got? We need to reconcile the work that we all do to what government is believing is the way forward, and what more can government do to get local government on side and assist and support local government in creating the healthy homes of tomorrow, and indeed not just the physical fabric, but the air quality within those homes that I think we're going to draw out today from some of our speakers. So away we go. And we just need to do the housekeeping first. Going to be recorded. Use the hashtag delivering decent homes. Use the chat function, please, with your opinions and your comments. And then to ask a question, well, perhaps it's easiest to put that in the chat box, but you could raise your hand and hope we spot you. And panelists are going to mute their microphones when not in use and unmute. I hope we'll all remember to unmute when we are going to speak. So let's crack on, and let's start with Simon Dennison, who's Head of Access and Quality, that team at the Social Housing Division of the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. Simon, kick us off, please.
Thank you, Lord Best. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, my name's Simon Dennison, Head of Access and Quality at DLUHC is what we're calling it. What does my job title mean? I'm responsible for the allocation and tenancy agreements of social housing. I'm responsible for the quality of social housing and resident engagement of social housing. So the thing I'm going to be talking to you about today is about the quality element of my work. So what you've got before you is a slide with the house line on what the social housing white paper is about. The summary line is it's about rebalancing the power dynamic between residents and landlords. It's as simple as that. There are many different limbs to the white paper, from the Decent Homes Review through to improved regulation and a different regulatory function by the regulator of social housing, through to information provision for tenants. There is a whole raft of activity flowing from the white paper. But the one you want to hear about today is about the Decent Homes Review. I don't know whether I'm being hurried up, but before I got to the end of that slide, I was moved on. So we've been undertaking a review of the Decent Home Standard. It happens in two phases. Phase one is an evidence gathering phase. Phase two is a policy evaluation phase with final decision on the content of the standard. We have just completed phase one, and ministers are yet to decide on whether we're moving to phase two. This is a gateway decision to kind of check in with our ministerial team about whether, on the basis of what we found out in phase one, they're content to move on to the next phase. Next slide, please. We didn't just do this as a bunch of civil servants in our ivory tower in Whitehall. We set up this sounding board, a very, very wide membership of core participants, plus I think it was near 150 non-core participants who didn't participate in meetings, but were provided with meeting papers, could provide views. We have had a very broad range of views flowing into us over the course of phase one of the review. Next slide, please. What have we heard? Well, that the standard is not up to date in terms of referencing new legislation. There are particular issues not adequately addressed within the current standard. Damp and mold, crime prevention being two obvious ones, and the standard does not go far enough in terms of energy efficiency and net zero. You're going to hear a bit more from Sam about that. But clearly, from the inception of the standard through to the present day, some years have elapsed, and the spectre of climate change is all the greater now. Can you move on to the next slide, please? So in the interest of trying to whip along at some pace, because I've only got 5 minutes, the next steps that we've got are a ministerial decision on moving to phase 2. As a result of the white paper, we undertook to run consultations on smoke alarms and carbon monoxide alarms. We published our consultation response last week and are moving to bring forward regulations. We are working on a consultation on electrical safety in the social rented sector. And we are also working jointly with BEIS on an energy efficiency and net zero consultation. I hope that Sam will be able to say a little bit more about that. We'll get on to the panel discussion. Hopefully there are some questions to come out of that, but I will stop now. Thank you.
You're on mute, Lord Best.
Already got it wrong. Yes, apologies. So many thanks, Simon. Moving swiftly onwards to Sam Balch, Deputy Director for Home Retrofit and Energy Using Products at BEIS. Nicely segued into you there. Please, Sam.
Thank you, Lord Best, and hello everyone. As Lord Best has outlined, I'm one of a number of deputy directors that works looking at improving the energy performance of existing homes, which will obviously be the focus of today's discussion. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you a very quick overview of the heat and building strategy in slide form. So this is your whistle-stop tour. The challenge is very significant. We have a very large number of buildings that we need to improve, and they account for a very significant portion of UK emissions. Our building stock is one of the oldest building stocks, certainly in Europe, and as a result, we have quite a large number of buildings that would be considered harder to treat, so pre-1919 buildings in particular. Most of our homes are connected to the gas grid. Some are heated in other ways through, say, oil or coal or LPG as well. We are still in fairly early days here. The transition is going to be really significant. We're going to need to see both the supply chain growing and improving sort of capability and capacity, and we're also going to need to make sure that the infrastructure is there to be able to support the transition. An important part of what we're doing is trying to make sure that there is flexibility inherent in terms of how we design and move the policy forward, but we also need to take action and start acting now. Next slide, please. So I won't dwell on this slide, but this is a good gives a good overview of the challenge that we face in the UK. On the far left, you can see the composition of the housing stock by age. You can see there's a very high proportion of pre-1945 buildings, which can be harder to treat. Aren't necessarily impossible to treat, but can be harder and therefore a little bit more expensive to treat. Next slide, please. So by 2050, we need to get all of these buildings to virtually net zero. There will be probably some exemptions for some buildings, but by and large, we need to get them to zero carbon. That will need action across the building stock and across 10 years. We can't necessarily sort of only focus in particular areas to get to net zero. Everyone needs to act. And our policies will need to go further and faster than before. Next slide, please. So this just sort of gives an overview of the heat and building strategy. So we're focusing on trying to take a whole system approach. We are focused on trying to make sure innovation helps drive down kind of costs. We are really focusing on sort of no or least regrets actions. So particular things like getting energy performance of existing homes up to a good standard helps us ready them for the transition to low carbon heat. We also want to ensure there's sort of flexibility of choice, but also certainty for the market as well, so that they can invest as well. And then finally, we're looking to try and target sort of financial support, particularly at those that are least able to pay. So, for instance, fuel poor and low-income households. Next slide, please. So, in terms of homes, we had previously committed to getting as many homes as possible to EPC Band C by 2035. As you can see, the social rented sector in particular is already making good progress towards that goal, and it's actually private housing that falls behind that level of improvement. We committed to consult on phasing in minimum standards across all tenure types to that Band C target, and we also committed to consider the idea of a net zero backstop across all homes as well in the net zero strategy that was sort of coming before 2050. We're also taking action on new homes, so the future home standard, and making sure that we are getting homes to a good standard, new homes to a good standard, so they don't need subsequent retrofit. And then we're also providing a range of different support for those, firstly, that are unable to pay, and then also trying to catalyse the market for green finance for those that are. Next slide, please. I will sort of skip over these pretty quickly, but this is just to say that we're also acting for non-domestic buildings, both commercial and industrial buildings and the public sector estate, to make sure that we're everyone is acting, and particularly in the public sector, we're demonstrating leadership. Next slide, please. So in terms of fossil fuels and the transition away from them, we have consulting on ending installation of fossil fuel heating in off-gas grid properties from 2024, non-domestic buildings, and 2026 for homes. And we are also aiming to phase out the installation of any new or replacement natural gas boilers from 2035 as well. So these are sort of big sort of commitments in the heat and building strategy. Next slide, please. One of the key commitments that we set out in the Prime Minister's 10-point plan was around our ambition of installing 600,000 heat pumps per year by 2028. In the heat and building strategy, we made commitments around launching our boiler upgrade scheme, supporting innovation to help make it easier to install heat pumps, and are also working to try and reduce the costs of installing heat pump technologies by at least 25 to 50% by 2025, and working towards parity with a gas boiler by 2030. We are also consulting on a market-based incentive that will make it easier easier and cheaper for the installation of low carbon heat pump systems that will be applied to heating system manufacturers. And we've also sort of set out sort of plans to rebalance energy prices over the coming decade as well in that document. Finally, we're also looking at how we can uprate the sort of installer training and manufacturing base to support this transition and big growth in heat pump deployment. Next slide, please. So another core element of the plan is heat networks, and we are looking specifically at what we can do to improve the sort of the framework for heat network deployment, including sort of the ability to start zoning from 2025, and we're also providing significant funding to help support the heat network transformation programme to build the sort of the capability and capacity to deliver heat networks in areas where they're most suited. Next slide, please. So alongside heat pumps, heat networks, we're also looking at how we can develop hydrogen, and we're looking at doing this through a series of trials. Firstly, at neighbourhood scale in 2023, moving to a village scale in 2025, and potentially onto a town scale by the end of the decade. We're looking at how we could consult on hydrogen-ready boilers from 2026, and we're also continuing to build our evidence base to better support upcoming sort of strategic decisions about the role that hydrogen could play in terms of supporting the transition to zero carbon heat. Next slide, please. So alongside all of the action we're taking on different heat technologies, we're also looking to try and make it easier for both the market and the supply chain to sort of invest in scaling up capacity. We recognise it's important to provide targeted innovation funding to bring down costs, to set clear long-term targets and standards to help mobilise private investment, capitalise innovation. And we're also very aware of the importance of green finance here, because public funding will only be able to support so much of the improvement. I think the key with all of this is we need to make sure the transition is fair and cost distribution amongst household businesses and large energy users is effective, and we're supporting those that are most vulnerable. Next slide, please. So alongside the different heat technologies, we also need to think about the kind of infrastructure requirements that will be needed to support the transition through from our sort of energy networks through to the way in which we think about sort of flexible technologies, storage solutions, and the way in which we plan and sort of map out how these transitions will happen at a local level. Next slide, please. Finally, so this is just to say this is kind of where we're headed. So we're focusing in particular on our £600,000 heat pump target by 2028 and other big commitments like our EPCC ambition. We are focusing particularly on trying to expand and grow the markets, supply chain markets, particularly over the next sort of few years ahead of introduction of regulations from mid-2020s. And then finally, we're also trying to transition and answer some of these strategic questions around the relative role of hydrogen versus electrification by the middle of the decade. Hopefully that's a reasonable whistle-stop tour. Apologies for going at pace, but hopefully you managed to sort of pick up quite a bit of the content on the slides without me having to read it all.
Well, thank you very much, Sam. I think that the slides afterwards are going to be helpful too, because we're going to need to ponder these at our leisure. But many thanks for all of that. Can I just, we're going to just have a few moments of discussion with you, if we may, while we've got the two of you there. Let me just be bold and go first with each of you. First of all, with Simon, I wasn't entirely clear, Simon, this movement onward within the department to your phase 2, the second part of your investigation, all part of the Charter for Social Housing Residents. What is the brief for this second phase, which I gather you haven't yet started, but is sort of in the pipeline? Can you just bring us up to speed on that? Phase 2.
Yes, of course, yeah. Phase 1, basically a consultation stage. Phase 2 is a policy evaluation and determination phase. So we will take the findings from phase 1, we will assess them against our policy objectives within the department and seek ministerial decision for any change to a future decent home standard.
And no timetable for all of this?
We intend to consult in the summer next year.
Right, okay. Thank you for that. It wasn't entirely reassuring because there's a bit of urgency here, but more consultation in 6 months' time anyway. I did have one for Sam as well, if I may, to start the ball rolling here. And any parliamentarians, do let me know if you want to come in next. But Sam, we already have requirements on the private landlord, the private rented sector, not anymore to let any properties that are below band E in the PRS. It's now not possible to let those properties. And yet we have, do I remember rightly, 631,000, but we have a very large number of properties in the PRS that are failing these standards. But as yet, there is no enforcement of this new requirement. It doesn't bode well, I'm thinking, for stepping up additional requirements as time goes by. If we don't get in there now, with these, because outlawing F and G is for energy performance, really we've got to do that. These are absolutely hopeless properties. So are we a bit stuck that we don't have any enforcement tools to make these things happen? And should we be thinking in terms of that? Sam?
That's a good question, and it's sort of obviously a challenge with all regulation, ensuring that there's sort of effective compliance and enforcement against it. When we launched sort of the PRS regulation requirements, when they sort of first came in for new tenancies from 2018 through to 2020 for all tenancies, we have carried out a series of compliance and enforcement pilots with a significant number of local authorities to understand how they are sort of effectively supporting compliance and enforcement in their areas. Off the back of that, we have just recently run a competition amongst local authorities for further compliance and enforcement funding. There were 117 local authorities that applied to that, and we've been able to fund 59 local authorities specifically with £4.3 million to carry out further compliance and enforcement activity. We are also developing a PRS compliance and enforcement toolkit, which we will make available to local authorities to building on the best practice from our earlier pilots to help them understand how they can support effective compliance and enforcement in their areas based on earlier learning. So we are taking action. We recognise more action is required, but hopefully there's already a strong upward trajectory there. And we recognise that when you extend requirements like this to Band C, that will bring further sort of compliance and enforcement sort of expectations, and we're thinking hard about how we design policies to support effective compliance and enforcement from the outside in this minimum standards area.
That was very helpful. Thank you very much, Sam. Let me just see whether any parliamentarians want to come in. Jill, could you?
Derek Thomas is on the line. I don't know if you want to come in, Derek.
Any comments from you, Derek?
We'll wait for Derek. There's some other good points in the chat, really, around.
I have a question from Frank Shepherd.
Frank Shepherd, sir, right? Okay.
Hello, thanks very much for giving the opportunity to speak. You were talking about, landlords in general. The way I see it is that the registration of all landlords before anything else is primary in my estimation, because, without having that record and that legislative sort of stuff in place, it's going to be very hard to keep a hold of an idea of who they are and what they are. So is that something that the committee would be looking at, or maybe progressing in terms of, putting that all into one sphere under one set of regulations, so that we could all find out eventually who's doing what and who's not doing what?
Sure. A register of landlords. We've got this renters reform bill coming before Parliament sometime in the new year. And that's one of the ingredients that a number of us would hope to find in that new piece of legislation, a requirement on landlords to register and provide details, which is the starting point for any enforcement. Thanks for that. Let's, unless any of the panelists want to.
I was going to come in and respond to that, just to say, in our recent PRS consultation, domestic PRS consultation, we consulted on the idea of a compliance register that would, previously we have worked on the basis of an exemptions register, but recognising, as I think Frank had alluded to, you kind of need to know who is within scope to in order to sort of support compliance. We're looking at the idea of a compliance register, but we're clearly talking to our DLUHC colleagues about how we sort of design and would introduce something like this to make sure that it supports effective enforcement, but is also sort of proportionate and pragmatic in the context of any wider reforms.
That's good.
I think I can probably usefully contribute something in response to Frank. Yes, it is something that we would be expecting the sector to lobby for, a national landlord register. I'm assuming that private rented sector landlords is what is meant by the question. We already know via the regulator of social housing who social housing landlords are. So I'm not going to try and prejudge what might be in a bill, of course, but I think it's worth raising the question. And I think it's worth doing because at the beginning, Lord Best put up a slide with a list of questions. And one of them was around aligning standards across tenures. It is a not unreasonable thing to suggest, but the devil is in the implementation. So we have a current regulator of social housing who regulates social housing, and they use the current Decent Home Standard as a baseline for enforcing. There is the Healthy Home Hazard Safety Rating System in private rented sector, which is different to the Decent Home Standard, is not regulated by the regulator for social housing, is regulated instead by local authorities. The teeth of the regulatory systems are quite different. So I suppose the question that I would pose back is, which system should we use? Which one is better? How do we know it's better? It's quite a complicated question, even if the question itself is entirely sensible. Sorry, that's what I was going to say, Lord Best.
Sorry, muted as usual. Very good point, Simon. Do we indeed need a regulator for the managing agents who look after about half of all of the private rented property in the country? Do we need more regulation, not just for physical standards, but for the standards of management and behavior? A big question. Okay, let's bring in the members of the panel, the industry panel, and hear just from each of them for 5 minutes. That would be really helpful, and then we can open up the wider discussion. So let me start by inviting Ceri Roberts, Head of Healthy Aging, the Healthy Aging Programme and Healthy Living at E.ON, to tell us what E.ON is up to. Ceri.
Thank you, Lord Best. I don't have any slides today, so I hope you'll bear with me for speaking at you for a few minutes, but I can provide these at the end of the session. So first of all, to give you a brief introduction into where E.ON is at the moment. Now, we currently supply roughly 20% of homes and businesses in the UK. And since mid-2019, all electricity supplied homes are with 100% renewable energy. And our focus is helping homes and businesses in their transition to net zero and supporting that by being a major installer in energy efficiency measures across the UK. Now, we have installed 1.4 million energy efficiency measures in over 460,000 homes since 2008, and that's equal to 9.5 billion in lifetime bill savings for residents. And that was initially through CERT, CESP, and now it's through ECO, so Energy Company Obligation. But actually, I'm not here to talk to you about energy specifically because that isn't my area of expertise. I'm actually here to share with you the work that E.ON are doing in the health space, linking health and housing. But before I do that, I'd like to share with you some background into why we would do this. Now, as mentioned by Sam earlier, the UK has one of the oldest housing stock in the world, and over half of homes have a Category 1 hazard. and that's an immediate risk to a person's health. And those hazards primarily come from cold, damp and mould, but also slip, strips and falls. And as we know, the NHS spend £1.4 billion annually on incidents and ill health as a result. So the home that you love so much, where memories have been made and cherished, can actually be a dangerous place to be. And actually, people can be disabled by their homes instead. Now, being E.ON, we see people who live in homes in an absolute dire situation, the people that need help. But we're there to fit heating solutions primarily. But after we've done that, we walk away. But we have a duty of care. Now, we're working with charities and local authorities. But what if we could have prevented a fall by adding minor solutions during a visit, for example? Now, in 2020, we bid and won a £6 million government investment to support our ageing population. And it was to be match funded, so it's a £12 million programme overall. And the idea is that because our population is growing, people living past 60, even 100, but they're not necessarily ageing well. Now, our trailblazer is called Homes for Living, and it will initially run for 3 years. And it means that this Trailblazer Fund can extend our offering from just free energy efficiency measures to health solutions too, linking health and housing, a topic, as you all know, that's been discussed by experts for years, but has never gotten the traction due to accessibility of funds and the ability to scale. Now, our aim is to help people to live independently in the comfort of their own home for as long as possible, but also bridge that experience gap between the richest and the poorest. Now, we are focusing on, but not exclusively, on those from poorer housing and socioeconomic circumstances, and we're using an eligibility criteria to do that. But these people are people that tend to age less well. Now, we're doing that with a hierarchy of needs methodology, with aspiration in the forefront of our mind. We're building from the basic needs, such as a warm home, providing safety as well, safety measures, and social connectivity, and supporting better mental health. But we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. Innovation doesn't always mean you have to create something from new if there are solutions out there in the market already. But we're working with businesses to come together, and it's the whole collaboration of efforts across public and private sectors that's the key. Now, we're partnering with Invisible Creations, who work with providers of social housing, actually, and they pride themselves on designing for dignity and provide adaptations that remove that old age stigma, look and feel from products. For example, the plant pot holder, there's a shower shelf, a toilet roll holder that all have built-in handrails, and they're also designing bathrooms there for all abilities. Now, research also tells us that adaptations today do remind people of hospitals and old age, so people are less likely to take them up proactively. And apparently also crime is linked to the white handlebars that stick outside of people's front door. And we're working with the local police to understand how better to prevent things like that from happening. We're looking at kitchen upgrades to support safety and utilise smart technology. The Ring doorbell as another product. But we're signposting as well, so social prescribing and doing things like benefit entitlement checks. We're also able to offer a tool that can assess your current ageing position and trajectory and provide professional recommendation from experts on how to regain lost abilities. But the idea is to encourage people to continue to be mobile as much as possible. But to do that, though, your home needs to be safe and support you in the best way possible. Now, this is an agile iterative program. It's user-centered, so it's crucial that we get the feedback from residents and iterate using that feedback with our advocates. Now, we have over 50 advocates working with us in collaboration. There's local charities, local authorities, health and social care providers, including the NHS, Centre for Ageing Better, and also the Prime Minister's Champion Group for Alzheimer's. But it is fundamental to create a new way of thinking where home adaptations are to invest in better health and not just fixing a current problem, and want people to thrive and not just survive. We're aiming to change away.
Ceri, I think I'm going to have to bring you to a halt there, but that was great, and that's emphasis on adaptations, retrofitting existing properties. That's really helpful to us. Okay. Sorry, you're getting the bell.
All right.
Mr. in the background here. Moving on, Richard Turkington, Director of Housing Vision and the Housing Renewal Partnership. Richard, please share some thoughts with us.
Yes, thank you, Lord Best. I'm actually representing the Academic Practitioner Partnership for Healthier Housing. We're a group who came together about 5 years ago, consisting of academics, researchers and practitioners across the housing, environmental health and health sectors. And we were concerned that government policy was overly focused on new supply and to the neglect of the existing housing stock, and that there were very few resources available to improve that existing stock. And allied with that, we're very concerned, very interested in the health gains that can be achieved, not just health gains, but wider social and economic gains that can be achieved from improving existing housing. If you want to know more about us, we're at healthierhousing.co.uk. Decent Homes is an important vehicle for us in terms of health and other gains that can be achieved. We're currently looking at exempt accommodation and the health consequences of private renting, which is a huge area which is yet to receive very much attention. There's a few points I'd like to make to contribute to the discussion. First of all, Decent Homes was funded when it was introduced by central government, but not comprehensively. And there is a big question around if you're going to have a Decent Homes 2, exactly how that's going to be funded, particularly in the local authority sector. And that's a considerable concern for us. A second concern is the importance of the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, which has already been mentioned. That is part of the Decent Homes standard. It sets a minimum health and safety standard for homes. We still think that's very relevant in two respects. First of all, it places a focus on tenants and residents rather than on properties. That's actually about the hazards which people might face in their home. And it has cross-tenure application as well, which is of considerable importance to us. Some mention's been made of enforcement, and this is a big concern for us because we actually do have significant regulation, legislation, but we lack enforcement, principally because of the reduction in the numbers of environmental health officers and officers working in relation to the private rented sector in local authorities. So enforcement is about having the capacity to enforce, and that's very limited at the moment. In terms of the application of Decent Homes, our concern, as I've mentioned, is on the private rented sector in particular, where there's the greatest concentration of poor standards measured by the Decent Homes standard. And there is the potential, we would hope, to see the Decent Homes standard applied in a tenure neutral way, but particularly in relation to the private rented sector. And a final thing I would mention is the issue of hard to treat homes. Retrofitting always sounds so attractive. It probably just means renewal, actually. But there is an issue about older homes in the social sector, particularly the housing association sector, where often those older houses were the initial rationale for housing associations of registered providers disposing of stock rather than improving it, and they go straight into the private rented sector where there is no regulation. Well, there is regulation, but a lack of regulation in terms of enforcement of them. So those are the points I'd like to contribute in the few minutes that I've got.
Unmute Richard.
I have to turn you off because I get the ding dongs from my monitor here in Parliament. Sorry, Gareth Eadsforth, following Richard's excellent presentation. Gareth is head of asset management for Mosscare St Vincent Housing in Manchester. Over to you, Gareth.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we're a reasonably small association. We've got around 8,500 properties across 19 local authorities, primarily in Greater Manchester. We've of those 8,500 properties, about 1,700 of them are pre-1919 properties. So we know the issues that come with that type of stock. In terms of Decent Home standards and our experience to date, we've done everything that most social housing providers have done with the work leading up to the 2010 target. Some stock transfers from Manchester City Council, which saw major improvements to thousands of homes, and there's ongoing programs of work now to maintain the standard. So what we see as not working is not much different to what everybody else has already mentioned. The standard, there's no emphasis on fuel poverty. So we think that the Decent Home Standard should play an integral part in delivering improvements in this area, SAPC by 2030. And major issues facing that, particularly when we've got 1,700 hard to treat properties. A few people have mentioned in the chat already of a fabric first approach, which is absolutely key. We wouldn't even consider putting an air source heat pump in a hard to treat property until it was properly insulated. So the issue we're finding with the decarbonisation, with the funding available at the minute, is it's primarily for properties EF and D. A lot of the properties that are hard to treat, 1,700 of those properties, I think there's about 60 which are lower than a C. So funding is an issue where we might be at those properties already at a C to be able to insulate about 1,600 properties with the required insulation is going to be difficult unless the funding is made available. The mention earlier of the whole house approach. I think the most important thing is a fabric first approach and funding being available for that. Another major issue within social housing and housing in general is the presence of rising damp, and we've referred to the HHSRS being a tool used within the Decent Home Standard. A property can have rising damp, it can have penetrating damp, and still not be classified as having a HHSRS category rating of 1, which would fail decency. So I think there needs to be something in there where the presence of rising damp or penetrating damp is an immediate fail, and that property is deemed not fit until that issue has been resolved. Other things that I don't think have been taken into account in the standard are around life cycles and component life cycles, and everybody within social housing seems to adopt the same standard of 20 years for a kitchen, 30 years for a bathroom. But what it doesn't take into account is the circumstances of a particular property, where you may have overcrowding in a property where a kitchen or a bathroom is going to get much more use than a kitchen in a one-bedroom flat. I don't think that's taken into consideration, and variable life cycles are more realistic. How that becomes part of the standard, I don't know, but life circumstances of a particular property that need to be considered. And then going beyond the actual property and considering the estate or the neighbourhood and the security of a property in a particular area. And it's been mentioned previously, the standard currently only applies to social housing. I think it needs to go beyond that, and like others had mentioned, it needs to apply to every property that's rented by somebody who rents a property to be their home. So that's it from me.
Great, Gareth, a whole series of good points there. I'm going to pick up one or two of them. Thank you very much for that. So we now have a bit of discussion with all the panel members. Can I just see whether any parliamentarians would like to come in? Jill, I think you're monitoring my colleagues. Are they content out there?
I think Derek's fine. He's not said, but he's there. He's able to talk if he wants to, so he might pop his hand up. I've asked everybody put their yellow glove up, the yellow hand up, and we've got 4. It's Mark Hood for Resi Design. We've got Sean Deans, who is with BEMA. We've got Michelle Akintoy. Excuse my pronunciation, it's probably wrong. Yeah, so I would actually take those 3, probably Richard, in a row, if that's okay.
let's do that. Starting with the first of Jill's intros there.
That's Mark Hood, I think.
Mark Hood,
Yeah.
Design. Resi Design, please, Mark.
Hello there. Yeah, I'm a technical manager here at Resi Design Limited. We carried out a study into 4,000 people to understand the science of a happy home. And today I've heard a lot of really good technical suggestions about measuring energy efficiency. But I'm wondering, like, how do you track and understand like the impact of these suggestions and these improvements from the people in these homes in the months and years after? Like, what is your metric for well-being?
Good point.
I'll mute myself. Post-occupancy evaluations is what we call it. Going back and talking to the occupiers to see what worked and what didn't. Yeah, any comments from my panel colleagues?
Ceri.
Getting feedback, so important.
Absolutely, 100%. And I said that earlier in the presentation. Now we're partnering with Newcastle University because we feel that an evaluation of a programme is absolutely critical. There's no point in people sort of basing their assumptions on, you know, what they think is going to improve people's health. So we carry out a baseline questionnaire with residents before we do any installation, and we do another post-install questionnaire after 3 months, and then another one after 6 months. So these solutions are there for residents for free who meet an eligibility criteria, but the idea is that they support in giving feedback. And we've had some really good positive comments from people and willing to take part in this study as well.
Great. E.ON's doing some great things. Thank you for that, Ceri. Yeah. Anybody else want to chip in? Let's move on. Who was your second one, Jill, on that?
We'll bring in Sean.
Sean Deans. Yes, please. Sean Deans next. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lord Best. So my question, I mean, it was probably going to be aimed at Sam before he departed, but I think it's a good question to raise anyway, and something for discussion, which is in the heat and building strategy. I thought there was some encouraging messaging in there, certainly around health and well-being. For example, in relation to ventilation and the importance of delivering that, for example, alongside energy efficiency. But I was interested about what the actual plan for, or government plan for delivering that was, because while there is indeed now some funding or allocated funding for heat pumps, as we've touched on, and as we know, they want to take a whole house, whole system approach, but that requires there to be a plan in place for delivery in other elements, such as insulation, ventilation, and so on and so forth. And there just seems to be a lack of plan, or practical or concrete plan for delivery on those particular measures. So my question was going to be posed to Sam, but it's certainly something that I think the panel can comment on more broadly around. Okay, they've said on the one hand they want to take the approach of the whole house approach, but what's the plan for delivery?
Yeah, it's a very good point. Are they just obsessed with heat pumps without really getting down? Sam, you're needed to defend your line here. Is all the money going for the upfront exciting? No one's yet got any heat pumps. This is new and exciting. Whereas really, it's the old insulation and indeed now increasingly ventilation. The fabric first. Get it done before you worry about heat pumps.
To reassure the questioner, in the sort of alongside the heat and building strategy, we sort of announced continuing funding for several of our schemes. So our social housing decarbonisation fund, I think, got a further 800 million announced over the next 3 years, and also our homes upgrade grant, I think, got 950 million announced over the same period. Both of these standards, so that's significantly more than the boiler upgrade scheme, which got 450 million. Both of those schemes are focused in particular on raising the energy performance of some of the properties that house kind of less well off sort of potentially fuel poor households in particular, they are focused on, they use a PAS standard, which requires a whole house approach when you're improving the home. So you think about energy efficiency, but you also think about ventilation strategy alongside that as part of that. And that's something that we would sort of endorse and promote when thinking about how we're sort of improving the wider stock as well. So we definitely take Fabric First seriously, and we're putting significant money behind it, and we're thinking about that in terms of how we approach minimum standards more broadly across the housing stock.
Thank you very much, Sam. Sean, you didn't tell us, Sean Dean, where you were from. Could you just mention that for the record?
Yes, that's absolutely fine. I represented BEMA. BEMA, which, yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, many thanks. And I think it was Rosemary Coyne who was next, please. Rosemary.
Good afternoon, everybody. My question really is, I work for the Sustainable Housing Action Partnership and also for Connexus Housing Association. And I think what we're looking at is how we work through whole place solutions. So making sure nobody is left behind in the retrofit agenda, obviously with the big health and fuel poverty focus. And I think we've seen from case studies such as Energy Sprung in Nottingham that the private landlords, which do have some of the poorest homes, are very reluctant to take even opportunities of joining in with schemes where they've got adjoining properties, even though they're offered a number of ways of having cost-effective work done. But then post-event, they see that there's a potential for their property value to rise, and then suddenly they're a bit more interested. Given at the moment, the regulations are that they don't have to spend more than £3,000 if that would be unreasonable to improve their private rented accommodation. I just wondered what's going on in conversations with RICS and others about evidencing the enhancement in property value that would unlock the ability to raise a green mortgage, or for private landlords to really become interested in actually looking after the quality of the housing they're offering to their tenants.
Yeah, excellent. Sam, I think that's you again.
So a very good question, and we have done a number of studies now that show a relationship between better energy performance of homes and house price value. So we've done two hedonic studies, one done some time ago, but one recently done for rental properties as well, that shows an increased rental yield where you have a sort of a better performing property. And we talk about that in the net zero strategy as well. We are working quite closely with RICS, who are looking at this issue around kind of property value. They already have some of this in their red book, which is their valuation book, that sort of advises valuers when they're looking at sort of evaluating properties. But this is something that we will continue to kind of work with them on as we move forward our work in terms of looking at, in particular, minimum standards, particularly in the private rented sector and elsewhere.
Thank you. Can I ask one tiny follow-up question?
Please.
There's a huge debate about warm rents now, and particularly in social housing, where the jury is split really, I think, on the morals of that. But there are also regulatory caps in how much a rent can be increased, or whether it can be increased to reflect investment in improving energy performance. So I just wondered about any sort of thoughts on that as well. So more advice and guidance on warm rents.
Yeah, I must admit, I think this is very, very difficult. You're asking tenants to put up with an awful lot of fuss and hassle to get their homes brought up to standard. Even if they don't have to be decanted from them, they're going to. This is going to be big trouble at the end of it. If you say, and of course your bills will rise, this will go on to the rent, the savings that you make on your energy costs, if any. Now, I don't think this is going to fly. But other comments from my colleagues, please.
Lord Best, Simon here from Department of Levelling Up. I will turn my camera on as well. So this is a not infrequently asked question, I have to say. There are all manner of things that, whether it's officials within the department, whether it's other government departments, or whether it's external stakeholders, wish to get done, whether it's in this area, whether it's in retrofit is one that's come up fairly recently. It is very much not a straightforward matter to change somebody's tenancy agreement, and it cannot be done unilaterally. And that is what would need to be done in order to increase rent, to deliver certain home improvements. So it's a great idea in principle, but the practice of it would be very, very challenging indeed.
That's helpful. Thank you, Simon.
I would jump in on top of Simon and say this is something that has come up in the context of some of the kind of deeper retrofits to social housing projects. And there we have had kind of discussions with the regulator for social housing around the idea of service plans, which aren't necessarily warm rents, but are something that is a kind of an agreement between the landlord and the tenant, rather than a sort of a forced change. So it's where there is some kind of consent between the two parties. I think there's more flexibility over that, but that's not a kind of a warm rent, as the questioner asked, and there is some degree of choice for both parties in exercising something like that, as I understand.
Thanks, Anne. So I think is it Tim Pye?
Yeah, Tim's gonna talk about lead, aren't you, Tim?
Lead. Go for it.
Yeah, my name is Tim Pye. I'm a member of the HSA Lead Exposure in Children Surveillance System Steering Group and the Lead Exposure and Poisoning Prevention Alliance. Well, thank you for the very interesting presentations, but I want to ask why there's been no mention of lead exposure in homes, either today or in the HHB white paper. You might not know that UNICEF estimate that there are 200,000 UK children with blood lead concentrations above our action level. This also matches the 2% mentioned in a recent presentation by the Royal College of Paediatricians and Child Health. And it's also estimated that this costs around £6 billion a year for the country. Most lead exposure is from dust or paint in unhealthy homes. So is this not mentioned deliberately, or is it something that's an oversight?
Anybody got some expertise on lead exposure?
I think maybe, no, I don't have any expertise. I think probably Tim is the expert, but I think the best we could say as the Healthy Homes and Buildings APPG was that we tried to make the whole issue, the holistic approach to health and well-being is really important. I think the points you raise around lead and indoor and air quality are very well made in the white paper, but I think, as I say, I think the best we can say is that obviously you've been in touch with the All Party Parliamentary Group. We will we need to raise awareness of the points that you've made, and I think it's the points well made, and we've heard what you've said, and we'll continue to acknowledge that point. I think that's all I can say on behalf of the APPG. He's gone.
Thank you, Jill. Any of the other panelists want to contribute to that one? It's forgotten list. Yeah.
I will come in briefly, Lord Best. We did not hear about lead poisoning over the entirety of the evidence gathering phase of the Decent Home Standard. If no one told us about it, we don't know it's an issue. So you could characterize it as an oversight, but I think that might be slightly unfair.
Okay. Needs to have its profile raised if it really is significant, as it sounds as if it might well be. So moving onward. Is it Will Swan who's going to put some point to us now, please? Will?
Hi, my name's Will Swan. I'm the Director of Energy House Labs at the University of Salford. I think I've put 2 points in there, but they're both related to the same thing. One's about it's about measurement and evidence. And I think certainly on thermal, measuring the performance of the impact of a retrofit or even in new build housing is some of the discussions we're having. The prices are coming down, so it actually makes it much easier for us to evaluate whether a retrofit is working or whether a new build house is performing. So I'll probably point people in the direction of the BEIS project meters. And we have actually had discussions with DLUHC about that being applied in, explored in new build housing. So I think that's important because, it's something that 10 years ago would cost thousands of pounds. It's dropping to a few hundred. I think the second thing, just to draw people's attention to, we're doing a piece of work for BEIS called DEEP. So it's the interaction of the level of retrofit you need to have different low carbon heating performing. And that's the results should be out in 2022, but we'll have a look at them, validate them, get some third party validation of those. I think the thing is evidence, and everyone we come across, we do a lot with social housing, a lot with new build housing, it's getting hold of good evidence of what works and what doesn't. I think we've built up a bit of knowledge over the last 10 years, but that's still, particularly with the rollout of air source heat pumps, I think having good evidence really makes a difference, and I think the costs are coming down.
That's good. Thanks for that. I think Andrew Hobbs has been trying to get in. Andrew, are you out there?
We've also got P. Davis, who's there. Oh yeah, Andrew's here now as well. Yeah.
Hi. Yes, I am. Hello, Lord Best. How do you do, everybody?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Well, I mean, I've just been listening to this. I mean, I've been putting a number of points up there in the chat.
Yeah.
We provide retrofits to thousands of properties. We've been doing it for 10 years. And one of the points that I sort of get frustrated to hear is that there's so much focus on energy efficiency improvements without corresponding action to the consequential issues of indoor air quality. So when you improve insulation standards, if you don't improve the ventilation properly with it, you will end up with these consequential problems. And we have an opportunity with the Decent Home Standard to really get that right. I mean, we like I said, we've been doing this for a long, long time, and I think that there's actually a lot of misunderstanding, technical misunderstanding of exactly how to treat these issues coming from the industry itself. I am one of these people who will say to you that natural ventilation methods should actually, in my opinion, be outlawed, because natural ventilation it does not help energy efficiency. And right now, the advice with COVID, and has been for years, to in the rental industry, is to open windows to get ventilation. Well, that actually can make problems worse. So there's a lot of miscommunication coming through here, and I think that with all of the short, medium, and long-term objectives, that this needs to be really thought through properly. And I think that the panel and those responsible for taking and making decisions need to take the advice of not just academics and science, but also people with experience in the industry who solve these problems on a routine basis, day in, day out.
Well, let's stay with that, Andrew, as you are able to offer some of that very advice from a really practical point of view. You're saying that natural ventilation, you're not approving of that natural ventilation, are you? I absolutely take the point. No insulation without ventilation. That's
indeed. I mean, I don't want to take too much time here, but I'll try and explain this quickly. I've seen numerous examples when people report problems to us where people are being advised to open windows and they actually make problems with mold and condensation even worse, simply because you have no control over the heat loss when you open a window. So for years we've been installing solutions during the winter that deliver the requisite ventilation the property needs, actually take advantage of the natural leakiness of millions of existing properties to make the solutions work, but don't require huge amounts of duct work or anything else, very, very energy efficient methods. But we see a lot of resistance towards these methods from sometimes coming from people in the industry who prefer ducted strategies and so on. And these things are not actually practical. If you read the building regulations for MVHR and MEV, it's very, very clear for very good reason why you shouldn't be thinking about these things in retrofitting. And yet, if you look at some of the guidance that's come out since the pandemic, a lot of people tend to be saying, oh, if you want energy efficiency, it's got to be MVHR. Well, as a professional, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. And, you know, like I said, natural ventilation methods really challenge what we're trying to achieve with energy efficiency and net zero. You know, so, and obviously, if you think about the fact that there's 28 million buildings in Britain that are naturally ventilated from how they were built in the first place, you know, that are contributing to these problems, these are all going to need retrofit improvements that will require a move away from the natural strategies they were built with in order to achieve the objectives we want to achieve.
Wow, it's a big point. It's a big point. Anyone want to comment from the panel on ventilation and insulation and the interrelationship between the two of them? Gareth, did you want to come in?
Yeah, ventilation is considered as part of the work that we do. If we're improving the insulation of a property, we also consider the ventilation, not just when we're insulating, just as a measure to put in a property to make sure it performs to as best as it can. The issues with ventilation and then other measures that you may put in the future. So PIV vents, Andrew, you'll know that are a good measure to put into a property to eradicate excessive moisture, but you may have a PIV system in your property and then you put internal wall insulation in as part of your improvements from a thermal point of view, and then you've got a problem because you can't have the two working together. So it is something that we consider as part of what we do, and we work with manufacturers and partners that we work with to get that advice. But sometimes what you may do to resolve one issue is creates another one further down the line when you have to do something else.
Yeah, the regulator of social housing gets these complaints from residents by the bucket load about condensation, mold and damp. And the landlords, the social housing landlords' first response is always, and sometimes no doubt accurately, it's the behavior of the occupiers, not the work that we've done to the property that's made the difference. This warfare between the two is very unhealthy and doesn't solve the problem. But are we getting any nearer to understanding how this balance between hyper-insulating properties and the condensation that can follow from that and the need for proper ventilation, are we getting any better at this? Simon, did you have a thought?
I do have a thought. I don't have a response to your final question, Lord Best, but it's just to reassure that ventilation is in the mix. It's very much in the mix as part of the issues being considered as part of the whether to go further bucket of ideas in the review that's going on at the moment of the Decent Home Standard. It is very much not forgotten. I'm quite interested actually in the natural ventilation doesn't work idea. So I can't remember who said that, but if they could put their details in the chat, I'd quite like to pick it up with you offline.
I think that was Andrew Hobbs.
Thank you.
That's an important one. Yeah, doesn't the social housing regulator gets all the complaints? It's the housing ombudsman. It's Richard Blakeway. Yeah, but he's in the middle between the landlord and the tenant here. Very difficult to determine where the blame should lie, and that's unhelpful, really.
That's
okay. Yep.
That's absolutely right. Lord Best, and there's I think arguably this issue slightly sits between the Housing Ombudsman, Rick Blakeway, and the regulator. The regulator looks at systemic organisational performance, and the Ombudsman looks at individual cases. So most of the damp and mold, poor ventilation issues come up with the Ombudsman, but there may very well be, or there may potentially be an issue of systemic problems with management within that, of property management within that organisation. So arguably it could fall for the regulator, arguably for the Ombudsman. It's slightly difficult. But just to reassure, ventilation is certainly not forgotten, and I'd quite like to pick that up with Andrew. Thank you.
That's good. Thank you very much.
Lord Best, I was just going to come in on this as well and say, on your final question around sort of ventilation, versus sort of hyper efficiency, and as I've alluded to earlier, I think we have PAS standards which require a whole house approach and people to consider ventilation strategies as part of fitting measures. I also think there is an important question for us here about how much energy efficiency is enough, and how far do you need to take properties. Clearly, the further you take properties in terms of the level of energy performance you improve, the greater the risks associated with it. So there is a question around making sure we have the right balancing act between enough to improve thermal comfort and well-being, but not too much as to necessarily drive sort of increase too much by way of increased risk. So that balancing act is important.
Thank you, Sam. Now, I think, shall we hear from 3 people, and then that might take us with the panel's responses up to the line. But let's make sure we get.
Yeah, Richard, I know that Tom Woolley would want to come back on that last point.
Right.
Tom Woolley is a bit of an expert in this department. So let's just hear what he's got to say.
Please, Tom Woolley.
Hi, thanks very much for letting me in. Sorry, I think it was quite useful, that person talking about outlawing natural ventilation, because at least it woke me up, because I nearly choked on my my afternoon tea cake as a result. I mean, it's an absolutely absurd point of view, and it's very, very dangerous as well, because the whole approach that we need to take with these things is to get the right solution for the right situation. And this idea that we have to depend on mechanical ventilation is extremely worrying. I mean, clearly, if you're I'm chair of the UK Clean Air Steering Committee, and I'm very much aware of the work that's been done on traffic pollution. And you don't want to be opening all your windows if you're right next to a really seriously polluting road. But there are many, many houses throughout the UK that would be much more energy efficient if they used natural ventilation. And I think we have to emphasize that very clearly. And there are ways in which you can create ventilation through a house by extracting the bad air through the top of the house. So that doesn't mean that the air is coming in directly through the window causing drafts. There are lots of very simple solutions. I mean, sorry, I wanted to raise a question earlier about retrofit disasters as well, because that's another area which continues to worry me, partly because a member of our family is currently just about to, I suspect, be affected by a retrofit disaster because they're an elderly person and they don't realise what's going to happen to their house. And I just wondered whether I was hoping that that might be picked up as well.
Just
thanks for giving me a chance to
give us an illustration of the disaster that you're fearing. Not necessarily your relation, but just generally, what kind of disaster are you highlighting?
Okay, well, there have been, it's estimated that somewhere between 500,000 and 1.5 million houses in the UK have had botched retrofit projects such as, and I even think, didn't Fishwick in Preston, that actually got featured on a previous APBG meeting at some point, where houses have had synthetic non-breathable insulation fitted to either on the outside of the houses or internally or in cavities, and that then leads almost instantaneously to dampness. And in fact, the ITV Tonight programme featured this only just a few weeks ago, where they showed us an example of a house in West Wales where this had happened. And what we have to be moving towards is using breathable hygroscopic materials, not sealing everything up in plastic. And it's when you seal properties up in plastic. And I was speaking to somebody in Merseyside recently who's responsible for home insulation retrofitting there, and he said that they wouldn't be able to do any work for at least 5 years because all the money was going on extracting insulation from the botched schemes in the area. And that's very disturbing because we know we've got to get on and retrofit houses. So if the money's being used to repair the ones that have already been botched, that is a major problem.
That's terrible, such a waste. Well, Sam is listening carefully to all of that and taking it on board. Yeah, thank you very much, Tom, for that. We've got P. Davis. I'm sorry, I don't know what your first name is. P. Davis next, and then Christine McHugh. Then and I'll come back to the panel if I may. Panel, be ready, please. P. Davis.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Lord Best. It's Pauline is my first
Pauline.
name.
Okay.
I'm coming at this from a view as being a tenant of social housing. But it's good to listen to join in these meetings and listen to all the experts. I just want to say, listening to Richard Turkington from Healthier Housing, he makes really good points. For me, the importance of the housing health and safety rating system, I believe it's a really adequate tool to equip the environmental health officers, but it tends not to be used. And as a result of that, no enforcement takes place. So tenants are very much failed when making requests for a housing health and safety ratings assessment. They're just ignored. So I believe we really need education, because I feel, and funny enough, Merseyside's just been mentioned, I feel in Merseyside, the Northwest generally, we're in the dark ages, and they really need educating because authorities are not keeping up. Tenants do report problems and are told to open windows, which in turn, as has been said, exacerbates the problem of condensation. And they're told it's their own fault because they boil a kettle or shower, which is unacceptable. So yes, there's a lot that can be done. That's already there. We just need enforcement of it, and for the tenants to be listened to. So yeah, I'm not very good at this, but thank you for letting me speak.
Not at all, and that's what Simon has been telling us. The next stage with the charter is greater listening to the occupiers themselves, the residents in social housing and indeed in other sectors. We want to change the imbalance between landlord and tenant over time. Thank you, Pauline. But Christine McHugh, you were the last to join us, please.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks, Lord Best. And thank you for hosting this session today. I think the debate sparked by ventilation and indoor air quality. So I'm from the Institute for Air Quality Management. I think it makes me wonder whether, in fact, a whole session could actually be devoted to that, because it gets very much to the heart of these competing environmental, what can be competing environmental objectives of energy, carbon reduction, and good air quality. I agree with Tom Woolley. You know, there has to be a role for natural ventilation, even in cooling. You know, you can see that there's a role for that in cooling. And then on a, so I do hope that you will consider that as a future event. Just on a slightly different point, the warm rents, just from a different perspective, it does seem to me that it seems a little bit, more than a little bit, cruel to be basically levying a fee on people who have been effectively suffering fuel poverty. And they're being, I know that everything has to be paid for, but it does seem very harsh to be penalising the people who are in fuel poverty currently. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. Well, I'm afraid warm rents have got no votes today at all. That's certainly not from me. Just on your cooling point, because we haven't covered that, but overheating. This is a particular problem with schemes for older people. I chaired the Hanover Housing Association for some years and visited all our extra care schemes, which Hanover, now part of Anchor Hanover, had an awful lot. And really the only serious complaint that I was getting about extra care housing was it's too hot. All the flats that face south, all facing south, and they get overheated. Nice big glass window, lots of light, yes, but overheating. Open the door into the corridor outside, even hotter out there. Meanwhile, on the north side, you never see the sun. So we adopted the concept of dual aspect of facing both ways, so you can get through ventilation through the flat, and that you get the sunshine some of the time. Everybody gets some sunshine. But that was a big lesson for me. Overheating, an underrepresented problem that we've got to remember too. But back to my panel colleagues, if I may, for a roundup of final thoughts before we draw to a close. Ceri, can I start with you? Any final thoughts from your end?
Yeah, so it sounds like the ventilation is quite a hot topic, and obviously it does impact people quite significantly on health. I think, you know, E.ON, personally, our focus is on energy efficiency to do that as much as possible. But I absolutely will be investigating into the ventilation issue, and there's a couple of comments there on the chat. So thanks ever so much for letting me be part of it, and I'll continue to research into that space.
Thanks very much. And it was interesting to hear your experiences at E.ON, because you're really acting like a home improvement agency, doing the same kind of things as they do. And I've thought for some time, we've just really got to get these home improvement agencies up to muster. There's going to be so many owner-occupiers who need someone to hold their hand and walk them through the whole process. Up and down the country, we've got to revive and resuscitate some rather dormant home improvement agencies and really get these motoring if we're to reach all those homeowners.
Absolutely, and Lord Best, I think as well, you know, with E.ON, our primary, you know, experience around delivery as well, and I think that's the key area where other areas aren't able to deliver at scale. So that's why hopefully the impact will be quite significant at the end of the 3-year programme.
Great, thank you. Richard, Turkington.
Yes, a couple of things from me. We focused on decent homes. We've not really mentioned decent home environments, neighbourhood, estate environments, and so on, which are as often as equal concern to tenants as residents as the quality of their homes themselves. And I can think of practical examples from my experience of, for example, homes improved, which improved security, but security wasn't improved in the area. So people felt comfortable in their homes, but not comfortable going outside them. And related to that, I'm going to bang the drum again for the Housing Health and Safety Rating System. Thank you, Pauline, for your plug there. It is intended that it's going to be reviewed by DLUHC. I'm aware of that. I'm not comfortable with the absolute separation of these. It's clear it does need reviewing. It's something for which training is required, but there is very good guidance available and training available as well. It's again about resources available within local authorities to enable that training and to have designated officers who are capable of going out and undertaking the assessments which the HSRS enables. Thank you very much.
Environmental health officers.
Yeah.
In many cases. Yes. No, really important. Thank you very much, Richard. So Gareth, final thoughts?
Just to touch on something you mentioned, Lord Best, and Pauline as well, with social landlords' response to reports of condensation. I think there has been a culture in the past of blaming lifestyle, and I don't think that's acceptable. Our new strategy certainly takes that into account. Where we will look into a report of what is being reported as damp or condensation, and investigate that to the point of understanding exactly what it is and being able to rule out if lifestyle and where it potentially is lifestyle, because I mentioned earlier overcrowding, accepting that unless you do something to that property, it's not going to make a difference, because circumstances again inside properties often need a helping hand to make a difference.
And you also raised the fuel poverty issue, which is a fundamental at the back of all of this. Well, yeah. that brings us to the end of the session. You've all summed up for me, so I don't need to do any more of that. But what I can do is thank Ceri, Richard, Gareth, Sam and Simon, all for contributing. I think that was a great idea. I think it was Christine McHugh that a whole session might go on the ventilation, insulation, condensation, any more Asians. That there is enough there for a whole exploratory APPG session, I think, and that could be really helpful. Jill, I leave that thought with you.
We're planning our programme for next year very shortly, so we'll capture a lot of the points made in the chat. But I think, thank you, Lord Best, because as usual, expertly chaired, and I think a really good session. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Jill. Thank you, everybody. Many thanks to all of the participants. Cheers now.
Thanks very much. Bye now.